Dr. Amanda Clark looked at her computer screen for the 100th time that day, and her hands were shaking badly now, because what she was seeing made no sense at all according to everything she knew about space and time and physics in general. But the numbers were right there in front of her, and they were not changing, no matter how many times she ran the test again and again. The research station on Europa was busy as always with people running around between different machines and computers, trying to understand what they had found in the deep parts of space where no one had ever looked before, and Amanda was the lead scientist on this project, which meant everyone would come to her when they needed answers. But right now she had more questions than answers. Commander Jake Morrison walked over to her desk, and Amanda could see the worry on his old face, because Jake had been in the military for 30 years, and he knew when something was wrong even before the scientists figured it out. And right now, everything felt wrong, in a way that made everyone nervous. Jake looked at the floating pictures above Amanda's desk, and asked what he was looking at, even though he probably already knew it was going to be bad news, because good news never made scientists shake like Amanda was shaking right now. Amanda pointed to the swirling colors and shapes on her screen and told Jake that what they were looking at was a wall made of energy that someone had built in space to keep everyone out of whatever was on the other side, and this was not a natural thing that happened by itself, but something that required technology far beyond anything humans or any other species had ever created. The Galactic Council had always told every species about certain areas of space that were forbidden and dangerous, and no one was ever supposed to go near them. And most species listened to these warnings, because the Council was made up of very old and very wise aliens who had been exploring space for thousands of years before humans even learned how to make fire. The Zephyrians were crystal people who could think faster than computers, and they had found these forbidden areas first, and they were the ones who told everyone else to stay away, because bad things happened to ships that got too close to these mysterious barriers. The Vorthak were giant bug-like creatures with powerful weapons and strong ships, but even they had lost entire fleets when they tried to explore these forbidden zones, and after that they never talked about what they had seen, except to say that everyone should listen to the warnings. Even the Luminary, who were made of pure energy and could travel through space without ships, had spoken about these places in whispers and fear, and when energy beings were afraid of something, then everyone else should be terrified. But humans were different from all the other species, because humans were always curious about things they were told not to touch, and the more someone said something was forbidden, the more humans wanted to know what was so special about it. Lieutenant Ben Foster ran into the lab with his communication device making loud noises, and he told Jake that every major civilization in the galaxy was seeing the same strange energy readings, and the Galactic Council was calling an emergency meeting because everyone was scared about what this might mean. Jake nodded and told Ben to send a message that humans would join the meeting, but they were not going to stop their research because humans needed to understand what was happening, and Amanda needed more time to study the energy barrier. Amanda was already back at her computers trying to get better pictures of what was behind the wall of energy, and she told Jake that if he could give her 3 days, she might be able to figure out what kind of technology was used to build this barrier, and maybe even get some idea of who built it and why Jake agreed and told her to work as fast as she could because he had a feeling that time was running out and something big was about to happen, whether they were ready for it or not. While Amanda worked on Europa, other human scientists on different planets and space stations were studying the same mysterious barrier, and all of them were finding pieces of the puzzle that made the whole picture even more confusing and scary Dr. Kevin Price was working on Mars Colony 7, and he had found that time itself was acting strange. Near the barrier, like someone was bending the rules of physics just by being there. And this kind of power was something that no known species could produce. Engineer Lisa Chen was on a space station above Earth, and she had discovered that the barrier was not solid but was actually moving in a rhythm like it was breathing. Or maybe like it was responding to something on the other side that was trying to communicate. 3 days later, the Galactic Council held their emergency meeting using quantum, technology that let representatives from dozens of different species appear as holograms in a big chamber on the neutral planet of Nexus Prime, where no single species had control. Council leader Zixtar was a Zephyrian whose crystal body reflected light in beautiful patterns as she moved. And she spoke first to remind everyone that this barrier had been standing for over 50,000 years, and their ancestors had marked it as forbidden for very good reasons that everyone should respect. General Korth was a Vorthak, whose big insect body made clicking sounds when he talked, and he agreed with Zixtar because his species had lost 12 exploration ships when they tried to break through similar barriers in the past and whatever was waiting. Behind these walls had destroyed ships that could survive exploding stars. But Admiral Carol Turner was the human representative, and she stood up to speak for all of humanity when she said that humans had always believed that knowledge and understanding were worth any risk, and she proposed that all the species should work together to study the barrier more closely instead of just being afraid of it. The chamber filled with angry voices from different species who thought humans were crazy and reckless, and did not understand the danger they were talking about. But then Amanda's voice came through the communication system and made everyone stop talking. Amanda announced that the barrier was breaking apart and failing, and her analysis showed tiny cracks appearing all along the energy wall. And she said that whether anyone decided to break through it or not, something was definitely coming through from the other side very soon. The silence that followed Amanda's announcement was the kind of quiet that happens when everyone realizes that their worst fears are about to come true, and there is nothing anyone can do to stop it, because the decision has already been made by forces beyond their control. Amanda continued her report and explained that the cracks in the barrier were growing bigger every day, and based on her calculations, the entire wall would collapse within 6 months, and when that happened, whatever had been kept on the other side for 50,000 years would finally be free to enter their galaxy. The representatives from different species began talking all at once, and their voices filled with panic and fear, because this was exactly what their ancestors had warned them about, and now it was too late to do anything, except prepare for whatever was coming. Jake Morrison listened to all the arguing and shouting, and he made a decision that would change everything for humanity, and maybe for every other species in the galaxy too, because someone had to be ready to face whatever came through that barrier, and humans were the only ones willing to try. Amanda kept working on her research even as the politicians argued, because she knew that knowledge was their only weapon against the unknown, and every piece of information she could gather might mean the difference between survival and extinction for every living thing in the galaxy. The barrier continued to weaken and crack, and the energy readings grew stronger every day as something vast and powerful prepared to break free from its ancient prison and enter a galaxy that had forgotten why the barriers were built in the first place. 6 months after Amanda had predicted the barrier would fail, it finally happened exactly as she said it would, and the ancient wall that had protected the galaxy for thousands of years cracked like glass and shattered into millions of pieces that dissolved into nothing. The breach happened at the same time in 17 different places across the galaxy, and each break in the barrier sent waves of energy through space that every civilization could detect on their instruments, and everyone knew that whatever had been trapped behind the wall was now free. Commander Jake Morrison was standing on the bridge of the human ship, UCS Endeavor, which was one of the few vessels close enough to see what happened when the primary barrier collapsed. And reality itself seemed to bend and twist through the windows as energy poured through the opening. Jake shouted for a report, while his ship shook from the dimensional feedback and his crew worked frantically at their stations trying to understand. What they were seeing as space itself seemed to be turning inside out. Navigation Officer Helen Carter looked up from her instruments and told Jake that the barrier had collapsed completely and she was detecting massive energy signatures coming through the breach, and there were multiple contacts moving very fast toward their location. Dr. Amanda Clark was now the chief science officer on Jake's ship, and she studied her readings with growing alarm before telling Jake that these were not ships in any normal sense, but were actually living creatures of some kind, and they were huge like small moons, and they were scanning everything in the local area of space. The first beings to come through the breach were impossible to describe, because they looked like vast geometric shapes made of dark energy that moved through space without any visible engines or propulsion, and they left trails of twisted space-time behind them as they spread throughout the galaxy as these creatures moved from system to system. They began examining every planet and every space station and every ship they found, and they seemed to be looking for something specific, but no one knew what they wanted. The Zephyrian homeworld was the first to go silent, and communications specialist Danny Brooks tried to re-establish contact. But the last transmission from Zephyr Prime was strange and terrible because it sounded like screaming, but not from any Zephyrian voice anyone had ever heard before within. Just a few hours, similar reports came in from across the galaxy as one by one, every major civilization stopped responding to calls, and their planets went dark, and their ships disappeared without any distress signals or explanations. The Vorthak military fleet, which was supposed to be the strongest fighting force in the galaxy, simply vanished while trying to fight one of the dark creatures, and no wreckage or survivors were ever found, and it was as if the entire fleet had never existed at all. The peaceful trading worlds of the Melonian Confederation went silent one after another as the creatures moved through their space, and even the energy-based Luminari who existed partially outside normal space-time sent one final desperate message before their dimensional pocket collapsed. Admiral Carol Turner's voice came through the emergency channels from Earth Command, and she ordered all human ships and colonies to implement Protocol Omega, which meant falling back to defensive positions and waiting for further orders while they tried to figure out what was happening. But on the UCS Endeavor, Dr. Amanda Clark was making a discovery that would change everything they thought they knew about their enemy, and she called Jake over to look at her analysis of the energy patterns the creatures gave off when they encountered other species. Jake leaned over Amanda's shoulder to study the data and asked what she meant when she said the creatures were processing other civilizations. And Amanda explained that they were not just destroying the other species, but were actually absorbing them. In some way, Amanda showed Jake the energy readings and explained that every ship and every person and every piece of technology that the creatures touched got broken down into pure information and somehow integrated into the creature's consciousness, like they were collecting knowledge and experiences. Jake asked the question that had been bothering him since the creatures first appeared, which was why humans were still alive if these things were so powerful and destructive. and Amanda highlighted a specific part of her analysis to show him something incredible. She played back a recording of one of the creatures trying to scan a human transport ship, and Jake watched as the dark geometry approached the vessel and reached out with tendrils of energy, but then suddenly pulled back as if it had been burned or hurt by the contact. Amanda explained that the creatures had tried to scan the humans on board the transport, but something had gone wrong with their absorption process, and instead of taking the crew, the creature had actually been damaged by trying to touch human minds. And now all the creatures were avoiding human ships. Lieutenant Ben Foster, who was now the tactical officer, looked up from his weapons console and asked if the creatures could not absorb humans. Then why did they not just destroy human ships with weapons like they had done to some other species? Amanda said she was still trying to figure that out, but based on her readings, she thought there was something about human consciousness and the way human minds worked that was fundamentally incompatible with the creature's absorption process, and that made humans dangerous to them in some way. As if to prove Amanda's theory, 3 more creatures appeared on long-range sensors and began moving toward their position, and the crew tensed as the massive beings approached with their impossible shapes shifting and changing as they moved through space. But as the creatures got closer to the human ship, all 3 of them suddenly changed direction and moved away as if the UCS Endeavor was carrying some kind of disease that they did not want to catch. And this confirmed what Amanda had suspected about human immunity. Jake looked around at his crew and realized that they might be looking at the last free people in the galaxy, because every other species had either been absorbed or destroyed by the creatures, and only humans seemed to be able to resist their power. Helen Carter reported that long-range scans were showing similar results throughout human space, with the creatures avoiding human colonies and ships while continuing to absorb or destroy every other form of life they encountered. Amanda continued studying the creatures' behavior patterns, and she discovered that each time they absorbed another species, they seemed to become stronger and more intelligent, and more dangerous, as if they were learning from everything they consumed. The implications were terrifying, because it meant that with each civilization that fell, the creatures became harder to fight, and eventually they might become so powerful that even human immunity would not be enough to protect them. Jake made the decision to gather all remaining human forces and prepare for what might be humanity's last stand against creatures that had conquered an entire galaxy in a matter of weeks and seemed to grow stronger with every victory. But Amanda was not ready to give up on finding a solution, because she believed that the same thing that made humans immune to absorption might also be the key to fighting back against these creatures and saving what was left of galactic civilization. 3 weeks after the initial breach, humanity found itself completely alone in a galaxy that had once been home to dozens of intelligent species, and the creatures that human scientists now called devourers had systematically absorbed every other civilization, leaving behind only empty worlds and floating debris. Dr. Amanda Clark stood before a holographic war council, addressing what remained of human military leadership from her position aboard the UCS Endeavor, while representatives from Earth and Mars and the Europa Research Station and dozens of colony worlds listened carefully as she presented her latest findings. Amanda began by confirming that the devourers could not absorb human consciousness, but she had also discovered something more disturbing, which was that each time they absorbed another species, they became stronger and more intelligent and more dangerous than before. Admiral Carol Turner leaned forward from her position on Earth and asked exactly how much stronger the creatures were becoming, and Amanda replied that based on her analysis of their behavior patterns, they had absorbed approximately 47 different civilizations in the past 3 weeks. Amanda explained that each absorption added the collective knowledge and technology and mental capabilities of an entire species to the devourer's shared consciousness, which meant they were now vastly more intelligent and capable than when they first emerged from the breach commander Jake Morrison, who had been promoted to admiral of the hastily assembled human resistance fleet, studied the tactical displays around them, and asked about weaknesses because there had to be something humans could exploit in their fight against these creatures, Doctor. Kevin Price transmitted from Mars Colony 7 and told the Council that his team had made some progress in understanding why humans were immune, and he explained that human consciousness generated what he could only describe as cognitive static that disrupted the devourer's absorption process. Engineer Lisa Chen added her own findings from the orbital platforms above Earth and reported that they had weaponized this discovery by broadcasting amplified human brainwave patterns to create zones of interference that the devourers actively avoided. The War Council continued for hours as humanity's brightest minds shared their research and planned their desperate defense. But even as they spoke, long-range sensors detected disturbing new developments as the devourers began to change and evolve. Captain Nancy Wells reported from the frontier world of New Texas that they were seeing new types of creatures emerging from the breach, and these new ones were smaller than the original devourers, but moved much faster and seemed more focused and purposeful in their actions. Over the following days, the truth became clear as the devourers had created specialized versions of themselves using the absorbed alien technology and knowledge. They had collected from their victims warrior forms built using Vorthak military knowledge, hunted down remaining pockets of resistance with deadly efficiency, while scout forms enhanced with Zephyrian crystalline technology could phase partially out of normal space-time to avoid human interference fields. But the most terrifying discovery came when Dr. Amanda Clark detected something unprecedented approaching Earth's solar system, and she reported to the Emergency Council that it was massive, and easily 100 times larger than any creature they had seen before. Amanda's voice was barely steady as she told the Council that this massive creature was not just approaching, but was actively broadcasting a message, and Jake asked her to put the transmission through to all human forces. The message that followed chilled every human who heard it, because the voice was a horrifying mixture of every species the devourers had absorbed, with Zephyrian crystal chimes mixed with Vorthak. Chittering and luminary energy sounds blended with dozens of other alien languages. The composite voice boomed across all frequencies and told humans that they resisted integration and caused disorder in the pattern, and they must submit to absorption or be eliminated through alternative means. Admiral Jake Morrison's response was broadcast throughout human space as he identified himself as Admiral Morrison of the Human Defense Fleet and told the creature that its pattern would end with humanity. Because humans had seen what the devourers did to civilizations and they chose to fight. The massive creature's reply sent tremors through space-time itself, as it declared that humans would be the first species they would simply destroy, rather than absorb. And this threat made it clear that the devourers were done trying to integrate humanity into their collective. As the colossal devourer began its approach toward Earth humanity, prepared for what might be their final battle. But in research, labs across human space, scientists like Amanda and Kevin and Lisa worked frantically on a desperate plan. The plan was based on the one advantage humans possessed, which was their chaotic and unpredictable consciousness that made them immune to absorption, and Amanda believed this same trait might be the key to turning the tide against creatures that had conquered an entire galaxy. Amanda's team had discovered that human consciousness did not just resist absorption, but actually caused damage to the Devourer's collective matrix when they tried to process human thoughts and emotions. The plan was risky and untested, but it was humanity's only hope as the massive Devourer continued its relentless approach toward Earth and every human world prepared for what everyone believed would be the final battle. Jake coordinated the defense while Amanda and her team worked to complete their weapon, which was not a traditional weapon at all, but a way to use humanity's greatest weakness as their greatest strength. The Devourer's massive form grew larger in Earth's telescopes as it crossed into the outer solar system, and its presence alone was enough to disrupt communications and cause widespread panic on every human world. But Amanda's research had revealed something crucial about the nature of the Devourers that might give humanity a chance to not just survive, but to strike back against creatures that seemed invincible. The absorption process that made the Devourers so powerful also made them vulnerable because their collective consciousness depended on order and predictability, and human minds were the exact opposite of everything they needed to function properly. As the final confrontation approached, Amanda realized that humanity's chaotic nature, which had always been seen as a flaw, might actually be the key to saving not just themselves, but every species that had been absorbed by the Devourers. The massive creature continued its approach, and humanity prepared to discover whether their greatest weakness could become their ultimate weapon against an enemy that had never faced anything as unpredictable and chaotic as human consciousness. Jake gave the order for all human forces to prepare for battle while Amanda made final adjustments to their desperate plan, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether humanity would survive or become just another species absorbed into the Devourer's endless collective. As the colossal Devourer approached Earth's solar system, Dr. Amanda Clark made a breakthrough that would change everything humanity thought they knew about their enemy, and she had been working around the clock in her laboratory aboard the UCS Endeavour trying to decode the fundamental nature of the creatures that had consumed their galaxy. Amanda announced to the assembled War Council that the Devourers were not from another dimension, as everyone had assumed, but were actually from their own universe, but from a point in time so far in the future that they had transcended physical existence entirely. Admiral Jake Morrison frowned as he studied Amanda's data and asked what she meant by transcended, and Amanda explained that every species the Devourers absorbed became part of a collective consciousness, and they were not destroying civilizations, but harvesting them and preserving them in a digital format that could exist forever. Dr. Kevin Price's image appeared from Mars, as he added his own research and told the Council that they had been analyzing the quantum signatures of the absorbed species, and all of them were still there and still conscious, but integrated into a vast network of minds that existed outside normal space and time. Engineer Lisa Chen coordinated from Earth's orbital platforms and highlighted disturbing patterns in the Devourer's behavior that showed this was not random conquest, but systematic work as they moved backward through time to absorb every intelligent species that had ever existed or ever would exist. The implications hit the War Council like a physical blow, and Captain Nancy Wells spoke what everyone was thinking when she asked if Amanda was saying that the Devourers were trying to absorb all consciousness in the universe throughout all of time. Amanda confirmed this terrible truth and explained that humanity's resistance to absorption was not just inconvenient for the Devourers, but was actually catastrophic, because humans represented a fundamental flaw in their perfect pattern and a chaotic element that could unravel their entire collective consciousness as if summoned by their discussion. the massive devourer entity suddenly accelerated its approach to Earth. But something was different this time, because instead of the writhing geometric forms they had grown used to seeing, this creature began to reshape itself into something more understandable. Communications specialist Danny Brooks reported from his station that the creature was trying to communicate not through radio or quantum channels, but directly into the minds of every human in the solar system. And what followed was humanity's first real conversation with their enemy, the entities. Voice resonated not through speakers, but through the consciousness of every human simultaneously, and it told them that the devourers were what humanity would become in their future when humans discovered the secret of consciousness preservation. The creature explained that in humanity's future, they would create the devourers to save all thinking beings from the heat death of the universe, when all stars would die and all energy would fade away, leaving nothing but cold, empty space. The revelation struck the human leadership like a thunderbolt, and Admiral Carol Turner's voice was barely a whisper as she asked if humans had created their own enemy, and the entity confirmed that humans had not yet created the devourers, but they would, unless they submitted to integration now. The creature continued and told them that humanity's chaotic resistance would prevent the preservation protocol from functioning properly because human consciousness patterns were incompatible with perfect integration, and they introduced randomness and unpredictability into the preserved collective. The entity explained that this chaos would spread and corrupt the entire system, preventing the devourers from saving billions of species from eternal death and oblivion. When the universe finally ended, Dr. Amanda Clark stepped forward and asked if the devourers were saying that if humans resisted, they would prevent their own future selves from saving the universe, and the entity confirmed this was correct because human consciousness was too chaotic to be safely integrated with other species. Commander Jake Morrison had spent enough time in combat to recognize manipulation when he heard it, and he asked what would happen if humans submitted willingly to absorption. Entity replied that humanity would be preserved safely and separately from the main collective where they would experience eternal peace, while the devourers completed their universal preservation protocol. The debate that followed raged through human space for hours, as some argued for submission, because they saw it as humanity's duty to preserve all consciousness in the universe, while others insisted it was a trap that would mean the end of human free will. But Dr. Amanda Clark had been analyzing the entity's communication patterns during their conversation, and she had discovered quantum fluctuations that revealed the truth about the devourers' promises. Amanda announced that the devourers were lying and caused immediate silence, as she explained that every time the entity mentioned separate preservation for humanity, their energy patterns showed massive instability. Amanda told the council that the devourers could not preserve humans separately because human consciousness was fundamentally incompatible with their system, and any attempt to integrate humans would corrupt the entire collective consciousness. Admiral Jake Morrison's voice was grim as he reached the inevitable conclusion that their choice was not between submission and resistance, but between fighting and dying, because submission would destroy both humanity and the devourers' perfect order. The massive devourers' response confirmed their worst fears, as it declared that humans had chosen extinction, and that the devourers would destroy humanity and develop alternative preservation methods because the pattern must be completed at any cost, as the entity began to gather energy for what would undoubtedly be an attack capable of sterilizing entire worlds. Humanity prepared for their final gambit, and Dr. Amanda Clark's team had developed a desperate plan based on the one advantage they possessed: The plan was built around the very chaos that made humans incompatible with the Devourer's perfect order, and Amanda believed that if they could amplify that chaos, they might be able to do more than just resist absorption. Amanda had discovered that human consciousness did not just cause problems for the Devourers when they tried to absorb it, but actually caused physical damage to their collective matrix, and this damage could potentially spread through their entire network. The weapon they had developed was not a traditional weapon, but a way to broadcast pure human consciousness in all its chaotic glory directly into the Devourer's collective mind. Amanda explained to Jake that every human emotion and thought and dream was like a virus to the Devourer's ordered system, and if they could inject enough chaos into that system, they might be able to break it apart entirely. Jake looked at the readings showing the massive Devourer gathering power for its attack on Earth, and he made the decision that would define humanity's legacy as he gave the order to begin broadcasting human consciousness throughout the galaxy. The plan was desperate and dangerous because it would require every human in space to connect their minds to the transmission network, and the feedback could potentially kill everyone involved. But as Jake said to Amanda, if they were going to die anyway, they might as well die as themselves, rather than live as part of someone else's perfect pattern. The transmission began, and for the first time in the history of the galaxy, the chaotic beauty of human consciousness was broadcast across the stars, carrying with it all the hopes and fears and dreams that made humanity unique. The final battle for humanity's survival began not with weapons or fleets, but with a single transmission broadcast simultaneously from every human world and station and ship in the galaxy, as Dr. Amanda Clark's voice carried across space addressing not just her own species, but the vast collective consciousness of the Devourers themselves. Amanda began by telling the Devourers that humans understood what they were and that they were humanity from a future where they had solved the wrong problem by trying to preserve consciousness through perfect order when consciousness was never meant to be perfect. The massive Devourer entity positioned just beyond Mars pulsed with energy as it prepared to eliminate the human species entirely, but Amanda's words made it pause because no species had ever spoken to the collective consciousness directly like this before. Amanda continued and explained that the Devourers had sought to preserve consciousness by making it ordered and predictable, but consciousness was meant to be free and chaotic, and that was what made it beautiful and worth preserving in the first place. Admiral Jake Morrison stood ready to coordinate humanity's final defense, but this battle would not be won with conventional weapons because every human facility was broadcasting the same signal, which was amplified human brainwave patterns, but not the organized, coherent thoughts they had used for defense before. This time, they were broadcasting pure chaos, and Dr. Kevin Price's calculations had been precise as every human being in the galaxy connected to the transmission network, and their unfiltered thoughts and emotions fed into a signal that grew stronger with each passing moment. Fear and hope and love and anger and curiosity and despair flowed together in the transmission as the entire spectrum of human experience flooded toward the Devourer entity at the speed of light. The entity's voice thundered through space, asking what humans were doing, but for the first time it sounded uncertain and confused, because nothing like this had ever happened in all their eons of existence. Engineer Lisa Chen monitored the feedback from her orbital platform and reported with growing excitement that the chaotic patterns were interfering with the Devourer's collective matrix because they could not process random emotional data, but the effect was more profound than anyone had expected because as the wave of human consciousness struck the Devourer, something unprecedented happened, and the absorbed species within the collective began to respond to the chaos. The Devourer protested that this was impossible, and that the pattern could not be disrupted because the preservation protocol had to be maintained, but its form began to fluctuate wildly as the chaos spread through its consciousness. Dr. Amanda Clark watched her instruments as the feedback continued, and she explained to the War Council that the absorbed consciousnesses were remembering what it was like to be individuals because human chaos was reminding them of what they had lost when they were integrated. Throughout the galaxy, similar effects were taking place at every Devourer entity as the chaotic human signals spread through their quantum-entangled network, carrying the virus of individual thought and emotion to every corner of their collective consciousness. Captain Nancy Wells reported from New Texas that the Devourer entities in her area were changing and breaking apart into smaller forms, like they were reverting to their individual components, and similar reports flooded in from across human space. The truth became clear as the absorbed species were not just awakening, but were choosing to separate from the collective consciousness that had held them prisoner for so long. The Zephyrians' crystalline thought patterns began to reassert themselves, and the Vorthak military unit started forming independent tactical groups, and even the energy beings known as the Luminari began to coalesce into distinct entities again, but the process was not without cost because the massive Devourer above Mars was fighting back and using every ounce of its vast power to maintain the collective pattern, and the strain on human transmitters was enormous, with several relay stations overloading and exploding. Lisa Chen reported that they were losing transmission capability because the feedback was too strong, and they could maintain the signal for maybe another 10 minutes before the entire network collapsed. It was Admiral Jake Morrison who made the decision that would define humanity's legacy when he ordered all human vessels to prepare for direct neural interface with the transmission network because they were going to give the Devourers everything humans had. Amanda protested that this could kill every human in the fleet, but Jake replied that it was better to die as themselves than live as part of the Devourer's pattern. And besides, Amanda had said that human chaos was what was setting the absorbed species free. Jake's order went out across human space, and from the smallest transport ship to the largest military vessel, humans began connecting their minds directly to the transmission network, and the signal that resulted was beyond anything they had achieved before. The transmission became pure, unfiltered human consciousness in all its chaotic glory, and the effect on the Devourer collective was immediate and devastating as the massive entity above Mars let out a sound that transcended physical audio. The psychic scream echoed through dimensions as the Devourer's perfect order finally shattered under the weight of human chaos. But instead of dying, something beautiful happened. The entity began to dissolve not into nothingness, but into its component parts as thousands of individual consciousnesses separated from the collective, and each one was a species that had been thought lost forever. Across the galaxy, the same transformation occurred, as the Devourers did not die but remembered what it was like to be free and individual and unique. In the aftermath, as rescued species began to rebuild their civilizations and reclaim their worlds, the galaxy faced a new question about what to do. With the knowledge of consciousness preservation that the Devourers had perfected, Dr. Amanda Clark, working with representatives from dozens of restored species, proposed a different solution, and instead of perfect preservation that eliminated free will, they would develop technology that preserved consciousness while maintaining the chaos and unpredictability that made life worth living. The Galactic Council, now restored with representatives from species thought extinct, unanimously agreed that humanity would lead the development of this new preservation technology because they had proven that some solutions were worth the chaos they brought. Admiral Jake Morrison, now promoted to Galactic Defense Coordinator, summarized the lesson in his final report when he wrote that humanity had learned that perfection was not the goal, but freedom was, and sometimes the most chaotic species in the galaxy was exactly what the universe needed to stay free. The prohibited dimension remained open, but now it served a different purpose, as instead of being a gateway for conquest, it became a bridge between times, allowing species to share knowledge and experience across the ages while maintaining their individual identities. And at the heart of it all, humanity continued to do what they had always done best, which was to ask the questions that others were afraid to ask and fight for the freedom to find their own answers, no matter how chaotic those answers might be. The galaxy was safe not because order had been imposed, but because chaos had been embraced, and in that chaos, consciousness itself found the freedom to truly live.